Welcome to Bethlehem Church online in Jefferson, PA. I'm Pastor Tim, and Bethlehem is a community-minded, family-focused, passionate church. We gather people to help them find their God-given purpose. We are so grateful that you're tuning in because we believe God will speak to you through this message tonight. Make sure to stay afterwards so that we can help you find your next steps in your faith. Enjoy. There are very few times in our life where we really get to see the true colors of other people. I want you to hear me out with this because I think a lot of times we really put up fronts or masks. People don't really get to see who we really are. And some of you go, no, I'm a pretty authentic person, or at least I'm an authentic person in church, but think of it with me. How many times you've smiled when you shook someone's hand and you really didn't feel like smiling, right? That probably happens all the time, right? How many times you say, oh, pleasure to meet you, buddy, and it really wasn't a pleasure. You just felt like you had to say it because it was a boss or a family member, even if you really don't like that boss or that family member, right? We see these kind of masks and these kind of walls go up a lot in our life. It's kind of easy to pick on people who are dating because they're the ones who are usually the worst with it, right? I like to think of like young people dating or even older people dating, right? They kind of like peacock. That's what I like to call it, right? They kind of like you put their chest out, right? Just want to look a little bit bigger, or they put their feathers up. They make a lot of noise, right? That's what peacocks make, but right? They make a lot of noise, right? If you're a young woman sometimes, right? You put your makeup on, you get your hair and nails done and your hair fixed, right? If you're a guy, you gotta, bathe for the first time that week, right? Maybe trim your beard a little bit. You gotta detail the car, you gotta wash, you can't show up picking a girl up without a nice clean car, right? And if you really go all out and you can grow facial hair, you gotta put some beard oil on, right? That's the good stuff, right? If you don't put the beard oil on, then the date's not that serious, right? But of course, eventually, 5 months, 5 years, 50 years, 51 years down the road, that really doesn't matter so much anymore. But at the point in time, it does, right? But we don't just do this in the dating world. We see this, right, at jobs. We see it with family reunions. We see it maybe if you're visiting a church or you're going to a new church, or just in general. Like a lot of times, we kind of just smile when we don't feel like smiling. We feel like we have to be nice. We have to be pleasant, and it's we don't really get to see people's true colors. I think with the invention of modern social media, it's only made things worse and more toxic, right? When people go on social media, they only post what they want you to see. Right? They only post the great sunset vacation photo. They only post a photo where they look really thin with only one chin, right, with a filter on it. Right? They only post the food that was really, the pie that came out really nice. They don't post the pie that was burnt, right? They don't post the photo on vacation where they have 4 chins. Right? Or with one without the filter, right? They don't post that it rained for 7 out of the 8 days on vacation, or that, that something happened, right? And if they do, right, you kind of go, ooh, why would you share that? Or like, man, that person just complains all the time, right? It doesn't really lend itself to that. I mean, some people do, but very rarely do you see their true colors, their true identity. It doesn't really come out. And so there's so many places in our life, I feel like, where we don't really get to know who people really are. And if we do, we still don't really know what they stand for, what they don't stand for. And I think not the only, but one of the best places, and one of the only places is in life that we get to see someone's true colors is in a crisis. Right? I believe that a crisis reveals who we really are. I'm not wishing or wanting or asking for a crisis for any of you to truly see who you really are, but I think in a crisis, it's really hard to pretend. It's really hard to smile. Right? Your crisis might not be a crisis for someone else, but whatever that crisis is, wherever your world comes crashing down, whether it's a relationship or your health or the world or World War III, whatever your crisis is, right? It's really hard to pretend to be who you really are. And I've seen a few things in my life. I'm not that old, but I've seen different people respond to crises differently. And I think there's 4 ways people respond. I'm sure you could find more than 4. There might be less than 4. There might be a combination of those 4, but I've kind of listed 4 ways that I've typically seen people respond. The first way I often see people respond is they just give up, right? If they were a dog, they would just roll over and play dead. They go, whatever happens, just too big of an obstacle, too big of a problem. I can't control it. I don't want to control it. I have no issue trying to get better. I'm just going to give up. I'm just going to be overwhelmed by it. Here I am. Just let the water take me over. I'm done, right? Kind of that mentality. It's like if they don't know the next step, but if they did know the next step, they wouldn't do it anyway. They don't have the desire to overcome, but if they did have the desire, they still wouldn't do it anyway, right? A particular person comes to mind, my great Aunt Jean. She passed away now 15, 20 years ago. I didn't really get to know her well until towards the end of her life, when she started having health issues, and my family stepped up to take care of her and her little Shih Tzu named Susie, and we tried to help her through her last couple stages, right? But she had an illness that was pretty much she probably could have overcome, and she went in the hospital, and after she went in the hospital, she realized, I don't really want to do this anymore, right? She realized since we were watching her dog, and her dog liked us more than it liked her, she had nothing to live for. And while she got out of the hospital, she kind of was like, you know what, I just don't want to live. And she kind of just gave up. We're like, Aunt Jean, you have so much to live for, right? We prayed with her, we were there, she accepted Christ in her life, we were as present as we could be, but at the end of the day, Aunt Jean was just like, well, she was a great Aunt Jean, right? It was just kind of like, I don't even want to try. That's how some people handle crisis. I'm not saying it's completely wrong, but it's not necessarily healthy either to handle something, right? Some things you can't control, but I'm not sure that's God's plan for us to handle crises, right? The second one is that some people just like to ignore it, right? They think if I close my eyes, if I hide my face, that it will eventually just go away and disappear completely, right? If I can't see the divorce, if I can't see the addiction, if I can't see the depression, or I don't think about it, I don't talk about it, I don't say anything, then eventually, whoop, it just goes away. How many of you have tried that and it's actually worked? You don't have to raise your hand because if you do, it probably didn't work, right? It ends up usually snowballing, right? It's an issue, and it's like a snowball rolling down the hill, and eventually that snowball gets bigger and faster until eventually you have no other option but to go where that snowball is going, or get out of its way, or to get run over by it. I think it's kind of funny because the past couple weeks ago, Ezekiel started doing this thing where he gets into trouble where he closes his eyes. So I think it was a night or two ago, maybe it was a week ago, he has this little toy plastic hammer, and he just decided to smack me on the head with it. Now, I wasn't too concerned because it was a plastic hammer, and there's not much up there for him to destroy anyway. But it did hurt a little bit, right? And so what do you do when a kid does that? You don't just go, oh, that's funny, because it's funny, but it hurts, right? And so he said, Ezekiel, don't do that, right? What did you do? No, what he's just started to do, just this new thing he likes doing. He goes like this when he gets in trouble. Or sometimes he does it to my mom. He goes, right? And Sasha, my mom, why did you do this? I'm like, well, I'm not a child psychologist. I know a little bit about psychology, but I believe, I could be wrong, he can tell me when he gets older. He's like, if I close my eyes, the problem goes away. If I can just not look at you and make eye contact, then all the things disappear. You know what happens when a kid just closes their eyes or looks away? They get in more trouble, right? Because that's insubordination. You're refusing accountability, right? So it ends up in more problems, right? And I think that's what a lot of humans do. I see that happens all the time with a lot of young adults. I see it in 22-year-olds and 32-year-olds. I don't see it as much in 42 and 52-year-olds, but there's a few out there, right? That if they just ignore the problem, it just goes away. Unfortunately, sometimes I feel like our denomination handles that too. And it doesn't work. It doesn't go away when you just close your eyes and then they go, la, 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 I can't see you, right? It usually doesn't take the power away. It usually adds to the power and the pain of the problem, right? The third way I see people handle it, a lot of times, is blame, right? They play the blame game. Not my problem. I didn't cause this. Wasn't me. You did that to me. And the problem with the blame game is that sometimes, while it might be right, there's no accountability, right? If there's no accountability, then there's no responsibility. And so while there may be extenuating circumstances that cause these things, people say, well, I'm not going to do anything about it because it's not my fault. Well, you have to do something about it. If you're in a crisis, you got to do something about it, right? Or it's not my fault. I was born that way. Or that's my mom told me to do it that way. Or they bring other people into it and ruin the relationship, right? I see this time and time again when I used to volunteer at a juvenile delinquent center in Ohio, that a lot of people and a lot of kids who were there, right, said, it's not my fault. Someone did this to me, right? I didn't do it. So if you have that attitude, you have the attitude of a 14-year-old juvenile delinquent. Ouch. Okay, anyway, but they used to teach these kids something in juvie, and I want you to remember it. You don't have to remember, but it was really helpful for me, and I use it with youth and grown adults a lot. This is the saying they make them say anytime they get in trouble and anytime they would leave and go on the bus, they had to say certain quotes and certain things. But this one they said more than any other quote, and I remembered it in one day because I heard about 1,000 times one day when I was volunteering. They said this. They had to shout it, but I won't shout it for you. Life is 10% of what happens to me and 90% of how I react to it, right? But he hit me. Well, life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. He made me. Did he really make you hit? Did he grab his fist and grab your hand and put it in his face? No. Well, you reacted to it, right? And so remember that. So what's the fourth way, right? These aren't all bad, right? We have crises. They reveal who we really are. But there's another option. We can get better. We can overcome it. We cannot let it be defined by us, but we can overcome it and see that God has a plan in the midst of it all and use it to help other people, right? We can actually get better through a challenge, through a crisis, and say, wow, now I'm not necessarily glad I went through it, but I'm a better person because of it, right? And all of us had an opportunity to do this 2 years ago, right? About 2 years ago, when the pandemic hit, we all got locked inside of our house. Right, here's some of the views of how we handle crises right there. We all got locked inside of our house, and we were stuck inside, and we didn't know what to do. And they said that during the pandemic, 3 things happened to people. They either became a chunk, a hunk, or a monk. I just like the rhyme, right? The chunk, a hunk, or a monk, right? And according to Hershey, I have some friends that work at Hershey, they said that the average American gained 15 pounds during the pandemic. So, adult, right? So, maybe Hershey is onto something, right? In fact, it was so bad. I had a friend, we have a family friend that works there. He said that, we started running the chocolate lines 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that we've never done that before. And we still could only keep up with 74% of what people were demanding. Right? He was like, it was bad. He's like, it was real bad. We've never run it 24/7 before, Tim, right? So obviously many of us became chunks. I'm not pointing any fingers. You don't have to raise your hand, right? But obviously we struggle with that. Some of us said, in the pandemic, I'm going to go for walks every day, right? I want to do some push-ups at home. I'm going to do some Pilates, right? I'm going to do some Zumba. I can put it on Netflix, right? I can start doing all these things. I want to get healthy. But, how many of us actually decided to actually walk and do those things? Many of us said it was a great reason not to pay for my Planet Fitness membership, even though I don't go there anyway. At least now I don't have to pay for it, right? And then some of us said, I want to become a monk. I'm going to get better. I'm not just going to get physically better, but I'm going to get spiritually better. Because before the pandemic, all of us said, I would read my Bible if I just had more time. I would pray if I just had more time. I'd grow in my faith, spend more time with God if I just had more time. Well, many of us had 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or at least more time than ever before. We didn't have, even if we had to go to work, we couldn't go anywhere in the evening time. Couldn't even hardly go shopping, right? We had all day Saturdays and all day Sundays to do this, and yet many of us didn't get more invested in our spiritual life. We got more invested in the life of the couch and maybe watching the world burn or watching the drama of Tiger King kind of unfold. That was kind of a thing 2 years ago, right? That was a whole entire mess in itself, right? But anyways, right, how do we become overcomers? And I want to look at this passage today and see how Jesus became an overcomer and how Jesus chose the 4th option in all of this. So let's recap what we're going. We're doing this series called The Last Week, and we're looking at the last week of Jesus before he dies on the cross. And we're looking at almost every single day and just really trying to wrestle with what he said, why he said it, and how that informs our faith. So day 1, Palm Sunday. A couple weeks ago, we looked at the triumphant entry, how there were great expectations, but almost immediately led to disappointment. Right? On Monday, 24 hours later, the Pharisees already wanted to kill Jesus. Right? We looked at this because Jesus had righteous anger, and he cleansed the temple. And just on that alone, they're like, you know what? Let's get rid of this guy. That's no more, right? It says that that happened on Monday. We also looked at Tuesday, right? Tuesday, Jesus went back to the same temple, irritated the same Pharisees again, then left the temple and spoke to his disciples and said, hey, get ready, the end time is near. Not just the end of my time, but the end time is near, and this is how you prepare, and this is how you watch, and this is what we talked about last week. You'll notice that we're not talking about Wednesday. We're going to Thursday this week, because on Wednesday, not much happens except for the Pharisees saying, let's get them. So if you want to know what happens on Wednesday, whatever happened between last Sunday and this Sunday, that's what happens. Not a whole lot of anything. So we're jumping to Thursday so we can look at Thursday in 2 parts. But what we're looking at today is the Last Supper and what takes place before the Last Supper up and leading to the end of the Last Supper when they gather and have the Passover. Because I want you to see here how Jesus handles this crisis, right? Because what it really is it is a crisis. We're going to look more at this, but Jesus' death and arrest and betrayal is imminent, and he knows it's going to happen, but yet he still continues on with doing what he's going to do, right? Let's look here at verse 17 to 19. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, where do you want to make us a preparation for you to eat the Passover? He replied, go into the city, into a certain man, and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house. So the disciples did as Jesus had directed, and they prepared for the Passover. Right? What we see here is that even though Jesus knows his death and betrayal and arrest is right around the corner, he still celebrates Passover. Right? He could have said, I'm not interested. He still says, hey, no, here's the plans. Here's where you have to go. Here's what you have to do. He still says, you know what? We're going to celebrate this holiday. It's an important holiday. He still chooses to eat it with his friends, and even chooses to be there with Judas, which, spoiler alert, many of us wouldn't want to be there with Judas because he's the one that betrays Jesus, but I think we already knew that, right? And so what we learn here in this passage, if you look at if we kind of zoom out and see the whole picture, is we learn this, that Jesus is calm, gracious, and non-anxious in the midst of a crisis, right? You can see Jesus in here is non-anxious, gracious, and calm in the midst of a crisis. I like to think of many of us were in the same shoes of Jesus, right? 12, 18, maybe 24 hours away from the end of our life. Many of us wouldn't be in the same place. Some of us would be hiding in our closet. Maybe we'd be crying on our bed. We probably would have canceled our Passover plans. We might have left town and hopped on a ship to Tarshish, right? Remember they joined, get me the heck out of here, right? Some of us may have started getting our friends and our friends' friends and grabbing all of the swords that we were supposed to turn into plowshares and grabbing those and taking them and saying, no, we're going to fight back, right? But Jesus is pretty calm, gracious, and non-anxious, even in the midst of this crisis, right? This is Jesus here gathering with his disciples, eating, right? In verses 20 and 21, it says, when the evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he said to them, truly I tell you, one of them will betray me. Now, in the Matthew passage, it makes it sound like they planned, they had dinner, and then bam, it happens right away. But notice that the plans happened in the morning, right? And then they do meet in the upper room. But if you put all the gospel stories together, they meet in the upper room. Jesus makes them take their shoes off. He talks to them for a while. He washes all of their feet. Has a little kerfuffle, I guess, with Peter. No, Peter, I have to wash your feet. Sit back down, right? He washes Judas's feet. Washes all the disciples' feet, even the guy who's about to betray him, right? That's pretty calm and non-anxious. If I was washing Judas' feet, I'd be like, give me the tweezers, I'm going to pull these toenails off. I don't know. I'm going to show him what a foot washing really feels like, right? No, Jesus washes their feet, right? They have the meal. They celebrate part of the Passover, if not almost the entire Passover. I'm sure there's laughing. I'm sure there's praying. I'm sure there's singing, right? That's part of the Passover. They eat the bitter herbs, right? It says the meal is ongoing. Right, the meal is ongoing, and then sometime throughout the middle of the meal, so this has gone on for a while Jesus had been calm, cool, and collected, he eventually kind of says something along the lines of, hey, just so you guys all are aware, just FYI, I'm going to die, and one of you are going to be the reasons why I die, right? One of you are going to betray me, right? And immediately the disciples say this, right? Immediately they say, it says they were very sad, and they began to say to him and one after another, surely you don't mean me, Lord, right? Surely you don't mean me, right? In the Greek, it means that they're almost heartsick, right? They're surprised. They don't know how to respond, right? And Jesus responds to this. He says this in verse 23. I think I have it up here. Yeah. Jesus replied, the one who has dipped his hand into the bowl will betray me. So not just anyone, but there's someone in this room who is eating from the communal place that we're eating from right now. The Son of Man, he says, will go just as it is written about to him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. Then Judas, the one who would betray him, thanks Matthew, he kind of gives us heads up, right? Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. And Jesus looks at Judas and answers, you have said so. Now I'm thinking myself, if I'm Jesus, which I'm not anywhere close to him, and I'm sitting next to Judas, sitting next to the disciples, and my hand's in the same bowl as the person who's about to betray me, right? There's pretty much two options for me. Fight or flight. I either flip the table over and go running, right? I don't think I could share a meal with the person who's about to hand me over for my life. But if I did get to that far, I'd probably eventually just run, especially after having this kind of confrontation. Most of us won't even have confrontations like this, but Jesus isn't afraid of it. But notice he doesn't blame or point his finger. Or the other option is the kind of Peter option where you grab a chalice or grab a fork and stab him in the eye or bang him over the head with the chalice, or we all dogpile on Judas and get him, shiv him, right? I don't think Jesus is a violent person, but right, that's the other option, right? But Jesus just says, well, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be bad. You shouldn't have never been born, but one of you are going to betray me. And Judas simply goes, you're not talking about me, teacher, right? And Jesus goes, well, you said it, right? He could have said, get him. He could have blamed him. He could have looked at Judas and says, you know what, guys? You're right. It is Judas. He's a dirty, rotten, no good lint licker, right? I was trying to think of an appropriate name for church. Lint licker is the best one I could come up with, right? Get him. Like, it's his fault. He could have pointed his finger. He could have called him bad names. There's so many options that many of us would have done, and we think Jesus should have done. But yet Jesus still remains calm, cool, and collected, and handles this with ease, right? And I think of myself like, I don't know. I don't want to brag too much, but I think I handle crisis okay. I don't think I'm the worst person handling it, but I think I handle it better than I used to. I think I role model an okay job, but when I look at this, I'm like, wow, I cannot handle a crisis like Jesus could. So what I want to do is go through a few practical steps, and then we'll get into communion and how that ties into crisis and everything. So here's a few practical steps for us. When you are in a crisis, remember your values. Remember your values. That's key, right? Because while you're in a crisis, that reveals who you really are. That's what I really believe. Who you truly are is revealed in a crisis. So look at your values and hold on to them, because you're defined by who you really are. And who you really are, you can't hide behind fake politeness or smiles or pleasantries when things are going crazy, because you don't have the mental or emotional capacity to hide it and fake it anymore. So if you're a kind person in a crisis, you will be almost certainly a kind person, right, in the real world, right? If you're an angry person normally, then in a crisis, you will be even more angry. If you're a gracious person, when a crisis hits, you'll be more gracious. And if you're a vengeful person, when a crisis hits, you'll go up to the spouse's car who the person's cheating you with, and you'll slice all their tires and cut the brake lines. That's what a vengeful person would do, right? So remember your values, because your integrity and character matters. Do you want to be remembered as a loving, caring, gracious, calm, cool, and collected person, or as an angry, vengeful person, right? Because that's the option, right? I think we forget that when we're going through a crisis, not only are we going through it, but people are watching. Not just your parents, but if you have kids, your kids are watching. Your coworkers are watching, right? And maybe they want to help, and maybe they're not trying to judge you, but if they don't have faith and they see you completely crumble under it all, they go, well, why would I want to be a Christian if they don't have their values in a crisis, right? Our faith speaks louder when we go through a hard time more than when it speaks to a good time. Any of us can be happy and slappy and smiling when things are going well, but not very many of us can have strong, committed values when things go bad. Right, so through the storm, right, make sure you keep your values, because on the other side, you'll be blessed, right? I think one of the most powerful things is when I was reading this passage today, and also this past week, I was realizing that Jesus is essentially the same person no matter what he's in. Whether he's doing a miracle, confronting the Pharisees, walking on water, falling asleep in the middle of a storm, or at the Last Supper with his disciples, he's pretty much the same person. Yes, he talks truth. Yes, he's straightforward, but he's pretty much has the same values, right? He acts the same no matter where he's at. Number 2, don't panic. For those of us who have anxiety issues or panic attacks, just by me saying don't panic makes you want to panic. It's like, don't panic. I'm not panicking, right? I don't think any of us enjoy panicking or want to panic, right? And I don't think we go, man, when I lose my job later today, my first thing I'm going to do is panic. I don't think that's how we are, but we do it because we're surprised, we're caught off guard, and to a certain extent, we can't control some of our visceral reactions. But what we can do is we can kind of control 2 things. The first thing you can kind of control in a panic is this. That was a breath, right? Your breath. Remember that you can't do anything if you're not alive. You can't handle it all if you're not conscious. Remember that God's the one who gives us the breath. He breathed life into Adam and Eve, right? God's breath, his spirit, is in us, and he breathes in us. So first off, please breathe, right? If I told you anything else besides breathe, I'd be lying to you. That's the most important thing to do if you're panicking, is please breathe. Then once you're alive in conscience, or at least stay alive in conscience, then pray. Right? Your breaths can be prayers, but you can also have words. You can also write them down and say, God, I can't handle this. I don't want to handle this. This is too much. You take it over and control it. I think sometimes we panic because, I learned this word recently, we catastrophize things. I was like, ooh, that's a nice word. I like that. You catastrophize things. It means that we make everything out to be the worst case scenario. And when you think about things always being the worst case scenario and how you have to respond to the worst case of the worst case of the worst case, then you start panicking because you don't have any control. Don't catastrophize. Breathe. Hand it over to God. Pray. Say, God, be with me. God, help me, right? In this passage, Jesus could have been like, worst case scenario, Judas tries to kill me now, right? Worst case scenario, they're going to be on the door. Like, Jesus could have catastrophized the situation. He could have panicked. But as you read this passage, I don't know about you, but the way I read it, even no matter if it's in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, right? Jesus is the most calm, non-anxious person in the entire room. The disciples are kind of going, whew. They're caught off guard, as they probably should be, even though the scriptures say it's going to happen, right? They're still caught off guard. But Jesus is the most non-panicky person in the room, if that's a word, right? Also remember this verse as you panic. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous hand. Remember, there's Bible verses out there like Isaiah 41:10 that God is promising to be with us, even in the midst of the problem. That somehow, eventually, it will work for his purpose. Maybe not this month or this day or this year or this lifetime, but somehow, some way, God's going to use this crisis, and you can overcome it, whether this life or the next. Number 3, proceed with normal life. Some of you are going to go, I don't like this one, Pastor Tim, but hear me out. When a crisis does hit, it is completely okay. You don't need my permission anyway, but it's completely reasonable and okay and good to put your life and put things on pause. So it's kind of contradictory to what I just said, but hear me out, right? Take off work. Go on a vacation, right? Stop. It's okay to wrestle with it. But what happens is when we put everything on pause indefinitely, forever, we do a lot of harm, right? We need to proceed with normal life to a certain extent. I'm not saying you need to go back to what you were doing 110% before. I'm not saying you even need to be moving in the same direction as you were before, but at least be facing the right direction, right? A lot of times when people go through an extreme crisis, like if they were eating healthy, and on a diet, they'll just say, I'm going to eat all the funeral casseroles. I'm going to eat all the chicken pot pie I can get my hands on, right? If I was on a healthy habit of going to bed at 9 p.m. and waking up at 9 a.m. on a healthy sleep cycle, right? I'm going to just go and sleep when I feel like sleeping and be awake when I feel like being awake. If I was on the road to recovery and I wasn't drinking, I wasn't smoking, well, the road to recovery goes out the window because I'm grieving, right? And you have to be careful there because while, you can take a break from things, hopefully not from recovery or eating or sleeping, but we do that, right? If you're not careful, you'll spiral, right? If you don't go back to at least going towards that same direction of being healthy or handling your stress or coping with it, you're going to spiral and stay in the same place. I've seen this. People who go through a crisis, right, after 20 or 30 years of being clean, after, making really good life choices, will take steps back, or they'll just stay in that crisis, stay in that moment, and never get better. I don't know, but I don't think God can really use us when we stay in that crisis, when we're staying in that spot and we're not trying to proceed just a little bit. I'm not saying you have to go back to work the first week or the first month, but you probably should go back to work if you're not retirement age, right? You probably should proceed with normal as much as you possibly can. And 2, this is another one that I see a lot of times with people who are caregivers, is you got to go back to normal because you have to take care of yourself. Sometimes we get so worried and caught up with taking care of someone else, we forget that we need sleep, we need to eat, we need to be healthy, we need to make sure our life's in order. And if we're not healthy, I hate to break it to you, not many people are going to take care of us, if any. You're in control of your body, except for what God wants to do to it in his time, right? So you need to be responsible for it, right? And we see this in the passage that Jesus continues on with normal life to a certain extent, right? He could have canceled the Passover. He could have said, you know what, guys? I'm not going to eat. You know what, guys? I know this is important to you. This is the most high, holy Jewish holiday we have. We remember where God saved us and delivered us and life and love and sin and all this stuff, but I don't want to be here. I don't want to wash your feet, right? He could have said, I don't feel like going back to normal. I just want to go in a cave and cry somewhere and just wait for you guys to find me. No, Jesus, to a certain extent, proceeds with normal. And as much as you can, not necessarily in the moment, but after, the panic's more in the moment. This one's more in step 2 or 3 or 4, right? Proceed with normal life as much as you can at the rate upon which you can, but don't stay in the crisis. 4, be grateful. We see this in verse 30, right? Verse 30, it says, when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So after all this takes place, after they take communion, the first thing they do before they go out to Mount of Olives to pray, before Jesus goes and gets betrayed and arrested, right? The first thing they do before they leave, or the last thing they do before they leave, they sing. They don't just sing a random song, they sing a hymn. A hymn is usually a song of praise, a song of gratefulness, right? In my opinion, worshiping and gratitude are essentially the same thing, right? When we're grateful, we worship. When we worship, we're grateful. And so even though the disciples are wrestling with this news and wrestling with sacrifice and all the other stuff, they're choosing to be grateful. Now, gratefulness does a couple things. Physiologically, I've done some research on this. Physiologically, when you have an attitude of gratitude, it actually rewires your brain. It actually starts to decrease levels of stress when you have an attitude of gratitude and you're grateful and you're thankful. And it also increases your resilience. And what's the other thing here? And it increases your level of satisfaction. So physiologically, when you just say, I'm going to choose to be grateful, it can change you, right? But when you're grateful and you decide, I'm going to worship like these guys did, like Jesus did, I'm going to worship in the midst of a crisis, I can guarantee this. It will be one of the most powerful worships you'll ever feel, you'll ever experience. And I can testify in my own life. Anytime I've gone through a really, really tough crisis, if I can just say, all right, God, I'm going to worship you, I'm going to praise you in the midst of this, it's almost always the most passionate worship I've ever had. Why? Because it's like raw emotion, right? I don't have to fake it. I don't have to smile it. I don't have to keep in tune with the piano. I don't have to worry about people behind me seeing me raise my hands. I don't have to sing the songs that I don't know that the pastor picks, right? I can sing whatever song, anytime, any day, whatever version of it, how many times in a row I want, and I can just cry out my heart to God, right? It's the most passionate worship you'll ever have, is to be grateful in the midst of a crisis. So I encourage you that if you ever go through a crisis, or if you're in one now, to just worship. Don't care. Don't worry about who's around you. It will really transform you from the inside out. But the last thing I want to leave you with today, since I told you we have to talk about communion, because this is all about communion, is this. The best way to respond to a crisis is to spend time with God. The best way to respond to a crisis is to spend time with God, right? The panicking and not doing it's good. Your values are good. Gratitude is good. Moving forward, proceeding, right? You're not dishonoring the person by moving on, right? That void, that hole, that issue is still there, but you're learning to live with that hole, live with that void. Like, that's fine, but the most important thing you can do is to spend time with God, right? That's what the disciples did. I think sometimes we don't realize how close the disciples were with Jesus. Right? They had just heard that Jesus was going to die and be betrayed. And they weren't just these guys who liked Jesus and showed up once a week. They were followers. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, you know what? They slept where Jesus slept, sometimes out in the middle of the wilderness, probably with nothing over top of them. I'm sure they were hungry when Jesus said they were hungry because they were worried about not having enough food to eat. I'm sure that they had people that they missed at home. Peter was married. He left his wife at home. And while for some of you, maybe that's something grateful, he left his wife at home for 3.5 years. That's not what marriage looks like or should look like, right? I'm sure from time to time we went to visit, but that's a lot that Peter had to give up, right? And then before this even happens, Jesus even tells them that he no longer calls them followers. He's no longer the rabbi, but he's their friend, right? He's not just a roommate, but they're friends. And they hear this news. And yet in the midst of all this news, in the midst of them wrestling with it, in the midst of Jesus potentially, saying, yep, Judas, you're right, the next thing he immediately does is he celebrates the first Last Supper, right? What we call communion, the Holy Eucharist. He decides to take this meal. We're going to read over it again one more time. To take this time and say, you know what? I want to spend time with you guys. I want to be with you guys. I want to show you what's going to happen, and I want to use this meal as a way to commemorate and celebrate why I came, so that you too can remember to be with me and dwell with me. Even after I'm gone, this meal will connect us. Right? He says a few things here in verse 26. Jesus says, while they were eating, they took the bread, and when the disciples had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine now on until that day when I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom. Right? He's saying, hey, the meal we're going to partake isn't just Passover anymore. It's something that I want you to continue because it's all about sacrifice. I'm making a new covenant. What I'm about to do, what's about to happen, has more meaning and more purpose. So while you're upset, while you handle it, here's how you channel your frustration, channel your problems, right? But what we also see in the word and the understanding of communion is the root word, and why we call it communion, right? We see the word commune. Some of you are thinking back to the 60s and 70s, like a hippie commune. That's not where we're going with this, right? Commune, same word for community, means to dwell with, to be with, to live with. And so as we celebrate communion, it's our job to be with Jesus, right? He says he wouldn't be able to celebrate it with his disciples again until they were able to do it in heaven. Communion is a holy heavenly meal. When we partake it, we believe this, that it's an outward sign of an invisible grace, that we are lifted up to heaven to take it with all those who believed, including Jesus and the Father and the Holy Spirit, right? That when we take communion, we put 100% of our mind, 100% of our heart to focus on Christ's love. And to remember that there's a meaning and a purpose behind it. In fact, I think it's even cool because communion is a physical sign, right? We get to physically receive something from Christ. It's not just us sitting here thinking and praying, I hope I get to lunch before the Lutherans do, right? It's actually us. Some of you are thinking that right now. You might get, we'll be close, right? But it's actually time for us to physically partake in it. So our whole heart, our whole mind, our whole body gets to dwell on these things. And so I want to encourage you to, as we prepare for communion, as we prepare for prayer, is just to remember to be with God. I think a lot of times in our culture, a lot of times in our faith, we think we have to do, right, to achieve, or do to have our identity, or do. But regardless of whether you're in a crisis or not, right, in communion, we dwell and be with God. And if you are ever in a crisis, which some of us have been or are or will be soon, not that I want you to be in one, the best thing to do is to dwell and be and spend time with him. There's no one better to spend it with than the author and creator of this world, of this life, and our love. Let's pray. Father God, prepare our hearts for communion, to really dwell in your presence, to have our whole being dwell with you, to stop and be still in the midst of any crisis in our life, any crisis in our heart, any crisis in the world, and realize that you are with us. You are in front of us. You are beside us. You are in us. You are behind us. You are all around us. And through this holy, powerful, amazing meal, this sacrament, this ordinance, we believe that your presence is with us like it is always. And we are lifted up in the heaven. Lord, help prepare us to just simply stop and be with you and focus 100% of ourselves with you. Father, forgive us of the times where we've messed up life. None of us have gone more than 24 hours, maybe more than 12 hours, maybe more than an hour without sinning. And so we ask for your pardon. We ask that you do not hold it against us. Just like many people have sinned throughout the Bible and through the Word, we don't want to sin. We know that sin is something that's inescapable, but we want to be set free from it. Lord, we've handled crises poorly in the past, and we don't want to handle it poorly anymore. We want to handle it more like Jesus than we do like ourselves. So forgive us of the sin, knowing that we are forgiven. And we ask that you pour out your Spirit on the bread, pour out your Spirit on the juice, pour out your Spirit on us, so that we may be one with you, one in the body, one in the bread, so that we may feel your presence in and around and near our hearts today, so that we can remember that you love us and care for us. Lord, we just are so grateful for this meal. We don't completely understand how it completely works, how we get to have a meal in heaven with you, but we do believe it's true, and we do believe it has the power to transform us. So Lord, we ask all these things in your name, we pray. All God's people say, amen. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or want to get connected, we encourage you to go to mybethlehemchurch.com/next. And if you want to reflect or take some action steps, look here.